All right, I want to share about one particular Syntonic light therapy filter that we use frequently. The Syntonic light therapy filters, somewhere back in the 20s or 30s, somebody assigned Greek alphabet letters to different wavelengths of light. And so one particular filter called pi omega, so it's two different blue filters combined, has some pretty amazing physiological effects on the body. We use them a lot for people who have vertical eye imbalances, where one eye is tending to aim just a little bit higher than the other. And it can be very, very, very subtle, but it can have a huge impact on day-to-day life. To tell more about pi omega and the use effect of the body, let me do a quick story of 30 years ago. An osteopathic doc came to my office with his skull in a box, skull he owned, and spent an hour showing the amazing design of our skull. And so we think it's just this hard protective cage for the brain, but there's actually respiration, and it's called cranial rhythm. And he explained how a number of the bones in our skull fit together with little finger-like projections called sagittal sutures, and they fit together. It's actually a hinge. And we have 6 hinges in our skull. And he explained if you lay a vector of action along each hinge, they all intersect right on the pituitary, so the master gland in our body. The pituitary sits in the most protected part of the skull called the sella turcica, or Turkish saddle, and the bone density is 100 times more dense than the rest of the skull. So master protection for master gland. Once again, masterful design. And so as the pituitary sits there and then it attaches to the brain, there's apparently a tiny little diaphragm, like the muscle we breathe with. There's a tiny one around the diaphragm. And so he said, think of Bert and Ernie on Sesame Street. About 14 times a minute, the head subtly expands and contracts, gets tall and narrow, fat and wide, like Bert and Ernie's heads. The skull is subtly pulsing. The brain ends up rocking and it milks the pituitary. Well, the dura mater, which is the tough coating over the brain, dura mater means tough mother. And so it goes over the brain, down the spinal column to the tailbone. So when the brain is subtly rocking, it's corkscrew spiraling the spinal column, and it pumps cerebral spinal fluid, pumps our ventricles, inner ear, sinuses. So you have this incredible pumping mechanism going on. So now back to pi omega. About 5 years ago, I had a gentleman in from a town north of Spokane, computer programmer, engineer, just years of headaches, eye strain. And so we were measuring, and both in a cover test, checking this way, he had one eye that there's the object he was looking at tended to shift diagonally. And then we confirmed through the phoropter device here that he measured 9/10 of a degree vertical imbalance. So when I wanted to aim, would like to aim about 9/10 of a degree higher. Traditionally, if an eye doctor finds a vertical imbalance and or symptoms, they'll prescribe half of the imbalance into a prism, into a glasses lens to compensate for that imbalance. I don't like to do that because half the time when people come back a year later, they've eaten up the prism, they've habituated to it and want more and more and more and more. So it increases dependence on the glasses. And so I prefer the pi omega for Syntonic light therapy glasses. Well, the gentleman that was here, his wife was with him, and it came up in conversation that she was trained in cranial sacral, so feeling the cranial rhythm. Her dad was a physical therapist, and he had said when she was graduating high school and she had an interest in the health profession, he said, you find a school on cranial, I'll send you there because it's so valuable to learn. Being the smart young lady she was, she found a school in Hawaii. So she went there, and so she knew cranial, so I said, perfect. Tell me what you feel your husband's head doing. So she was feeling it, says, well, the cranial rhythm is going front to back as it should be, but she said, I feel a torque on the front of his head. She could feel kind of a twisting during that measurement. So I put the compensatory prism into the device, had her feel the cranial rhythm, and she said, well, it stopped the torque, which is good, but the bad news was it actually dampened down the cranial rhythm, so less cerebral spinal fluid flow. That's not good. He was sitting in the exam chair right here. He put on the little blue glasses, the Pi Omega. She went to feel, and she's like, oh, well, that's way better. It's not torquing, but it's moving much more the way it should. Well, because that particular blue filter not only ties in with the cranial rhythm, but ties in with neck, back, hip, and hamstrings. The directions with that filter are for the person to sit on the floor, their back against the wall, feet out in front to engage other body parts. So her husband sat on the floor, put the blue glasses on, she went to feel, and she started to cry. She was just like, this is going so deep for healing. It just blew her away. The difference sitting on the floor compared to sitting in the chair with the same pair of blue glasses. That particular filter, Pi Omega, has some very amazing physiological effects for the whole body.